Hello and thank you for joining me today. We're going to go through the process of creating this photograph. This photograph was initially shot with this framing and this framing, which is basically the same framing, but the difference is the focus point. So on this one I'm focusing in the foreground, and on this one I'm focusing back here so I can get the trees nice and focused. Notice, however, that we've got this little compositional no-no. At least in my book it's a huge no-no. If you're going to crop something off, just crop it off. But if you're going to keep it in the frame, then you should keep it in the frame. Don't let it kiss the edge like that. And let me set this back to where it was originally as shot, so we can take a look. I've got some virtual copies going so we can take a look at what it looked like in camera. So with this, we can look at the histogram and see we've got some really dark areas and we got some really bright areas, and when I click on this it will show us where these items are totally clipping out as far as pure white is concerned. And so you can see I tried to do my best to split the difference, and here we've got some pure blacks where those blue items are coming in. I tried to split the difference so I could then have maximum flexibility when I get to work here in Photoshop and Lightroom. So I could have done an HDR. In fact, I originally shot this with some HDR ideas in mind, but I realized I really have enough information in the image already. I don't need to do the HDR, and I saved myself some extra time in processing and all that other good stuff. We have a little bit of clip out, but we can recover that. Let's take a look at what happened when we did the processing. So we're here in the development module, and the exposure is flat, the contrast I left flat. So on the highlights I left it, the shadows really boosted it up here at 62. So as you can see, when I take the shadows off, we'll just go to this image and flip back and forth. That's a significant difference in what's happening down here. The whites is not too much. It's just helping to prevent those items from completely blowing out. And you can see when I hover over this, there's nothing that is pure white. So yay, I had success. It still looks very, very bright, but at least it's not completely blown out. And I could take that down further, but there's actually, you see how it affects so much up here. Alright, my clarity boosted a little bit, just looking to bring out a little bit of virtual sharpness, if you want to call it that, here in these items, and it helps with the tree a little bit as well. In saturation, I boosted that a little bit as well to boost up the wheat here in the foreground, but the magic for the sky comes from this graduated filter. So if I hover over this item, it'll show you where it's applying with that little mask overlay, and then I click on it and it shows you the actual settings that are on this item. So I'm taking down the exposure by 1 and almost a little over a quarter stops, and then I'm boosting some saturation just in the sky as well, so I can really bring it back to what it pretty much looked like to the eye. The camera, of course, is imperfect, and so I'm using software to bring it back to where it was. That graduated filter also created a little bit of a shadow, so if I go back into that and I take that off, you can see how it really wasn't in that dark of a shadow. It was a little bit of a shadow on the back side of that hill, but when I have that, it emphasizes that. And I decided I was going to live with it. If that's something that you didn't like in your image, if you had a similar thing, then you could use the brush tool and you could paint in detailed and get right along the edge there. And I decided not to spend that much time or concern myself with it. Let's take a look now at what we ended up doing in Photoshop. So I've got these two images ready to go, and notice too, one more thing before we get into Photoshop. Here up in the top section of the image, I've got a little bit of room there on the tree, and that's what I was looking at when I composed the image. And then I refocused, and I didn't realize this lens had a bit of focus breathing, and then it effectively zoomed in a little bit, and that's when it ended up clipping the edge here, and I should say kissing the edge of the tree, kissing the edge of the frame. And I just wasn't being very vigilant, and that passed by me when I was shooting. So we're going to fix it in post-production here. But we got to take this now into Photoshop, so we're going to go to Edit in and Open as Layers in Photoshop. To the magic of video editing, we're able to instantly see this open in Photoshop, and let's verify how our items are coming along. So the top layer is the one where it's in the foreground is in focus, and the bottom layer is the one where the background is in focus. So that tells me when I do a layer mask on this, I'm going to mask out the top section of this layer. So let's create the layer mask, Let's get on our brush by hitting the B key. And it's really big, probably too big for what I need here. I'm going to hit the left bracket. And then I also want to make that sucker a nice hard brush. And I want to make sure my foreground color is black, and here we go. I'm going to paint this out. Now you might think, you know what I should do? I should show you the reason why I didn't just do the focus stacking technique. Because on this image, here we go with stacking images, so you can take your focus, different focal areas, and blend them together. And as Photoshop works on it, it should just give us a nice seamless image to where it says, okay, here's your foreground, here's your background, everything's beautiful and in focus. But it doesn't do that with this image. It just really messed up. So what we're going to do then is go with the original plan that I had there, and we'll just paint this in. And you can see how it shifts that tree due to the focus breathing. And I'm being really loose right now. I'm not going to worry about the details on my first overall swath, and if I hold Option I can take a look, and yep, I've got a nice solid mask going on here. So let's bring that back. We're going to make this brush a lot smaller and softer. So left bracket to make it smaller, shift, left bracket to make it softer, and then I'm going to zoom in. And I'm going to use the ridge line. See how it kind of graphs in the new ridge line as I'm coming along here. I'm going to use that ridge line as my transitional phase, my transitional area. I'll harden the brush up just a hair. And so we hide that transition line right, and I do have to, you know, break the pattern there around the tree trunks, and that'll be fine. We'll get it going. But I'm able to hide the transition line, and everything is just going to blend together really nicely. So we still have a little bit of a ghost trunk down here, and so this is where we just work in a little more detail. Again, still using a really soft brush, full softness now, and bring that back in. So not too shabby over here, but I have a little bit of kind of oopsie going on over here. If I switch my colors by hitting X, I can then reverse the effect that I have going on. Let's look at our mask once again. Option click on the mask, and here you can see there's a little bit of a shadow, if you would want to call that, where it's not full on black. Well, we want that to be fully black, so it totally blocks that area out. And we didn't have any other gaps, so that's good. Alright, we're basically done with that part of it. So here I can turn it off and on, and here we have the in focus foreground and just not. So we now need to add a little bit of sky, and I know my purist friends out there are going to hate me for doing this, and that's, you know, I respect that, but we're going to add it anyway because this composition stinks in my opinion without it. So I'm going to use my crop tool and just add a little bit of space here. And then what we want to do is make sure we're on that layer that we're going to be affecting, and then I'm going to use the magic wand tool, make a selection, shift delete will bring up the fill dialog box, shift backspace if you're on a PC. And I'm going to use content aware fill and not preserve transparency, because if I did that, of course nothing would happen. So content aware fill, it analyzes and says, hey, he just wants more sky. And then I always like to get in and double check what's going on here. Make sure I don't, you know, there's a little bit of kind of repeated oopsies there. And this isn't too shabby here. But on my inspection, I'm just like, you know, silly me. I should have corrected for this in Lightroom, but I got a couple of dust specks going on. And so we'll take care of those. And then I think I'll just use it to take care of these cloud anomalies as well that just look silly, and that is not too bad right there. Alright, now we're almost done. I know from my inspection in Lightroom that this isn't blown out to pure white, but if you want just a little bit more color in that area, which I would argue is more accurate to what you actually saw when you were there, when I was there, then I like to take a little bit of a sample of the cloud there, and so I'm sampling that, and you can see it shows up here. I'm going to create a new layer. I'll drag that to the top. And then I'm going to get it back on my brush, and I'm going to go gargantuan here, just holding my right bracket down. And you can see from the little indicator up here in the corner, it's still really soft, and that's great. We just want that. And I'm just going to center it right on the sun, and one single click, and there we have it. Isn't that beautiful? Hallelujah. No, that's not done. All right, so what we do here is we're going to take this down to about roughly 20, maybe 15%. We'll start out with 20. And then we're going to mess with our blend mode, and we're going to go to darken. But I really want to show you overlay because it's just kind of gross. See, this is it's oversaturated in the tree there, and I personally think that's a little bit on the gross side. If we use darken, what it's going to do is take out that saturation effect, and it just, Photoshop says, of these two layers, or actually anything beneath it, from this and whatever's beneath it, what's darker? Is this layer darker or is that layer darker? So whichever's darker, that's what we're going to show. And so that's why we get the beauty of showing a little bit more color there in that sun area, and maybe really 15 is where it should be. So we get a little more color there, but we don't affect anything else, and that's just beautiful. So then you just hit Command S to save, and it pops you back over into Lightroom, and then here's my final image. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial today. I encourage you to go ahead and get out and shoot. Certainly give me some feedback, always looking forward to that. Until next time, happy shooting.